So for those that are here, we're going to be talking about capturing your content today. My name is Pat Myers. I'm the co-founder and executive vice president but I'm also the resident expert of Ephesoft within Zia Consulting. So we've been a partner with Ephesoft since 2010, late 2010, and so we were one of the first partners and also 3 of the 4 authors of the book. And so we have some, I'm not here to talk about myself though, but we've been working with the technology for a while. It's a fairly young technology, but it's very powerful. And so we're going to start talking about how it is effective within your Alfresco repository, how you might be able to utilize it. So who has been in the ECM practice for, I think that this was a question that was asked for like 5 years and more? Enterprise content. A few of us. Well, I've been doing this since like 1997, so doing some really early like 4X implementations of Documentum. And we thought we were really smart at the time. You know, like we would create these very complex systems that users can spend hours in and index their information. But there was no real adoption. So at a business level, at an auditing level, they're very compliant. But it turns out that if people weren't actually using the system, there was no information to be had there. So we created these overly complex processes to try to have the business process for our records management or any sort of compliance that we had, or if we're doing publishing applications, we would want to have it indexed so we can find it and do rights management. So it's a slew of verticals that we create these overly complex systems, but it's hard to get. But now, within the last 5 years, commodity software has changed the game. So now even those users that were dissatisfied with their solutions now have just decided they're not going to use this. So now I can use Dropbox, I can use Facebook, I can use these things that are these commodity cloud software. So now they're even more aggravated about the systems that we put in place that are overly complex. So how did we actually make it so they had to do this? So we created, you had to put it in the right place, they had to create the right taxonomy to put it inside of here, they had to set the document types, they had to set the properties, and this still exists today. I mean, if you look for an out-of-the-box solution with any pretty much content management system, it's a very complex process. It's very manually driven. So you actually have to set that metadata. You have to start the business process. You have to do everything other than that. But we're smarter than that. But unfortunately, we're still creating a bunch of trash because they're not able to do that. They're not able to, they don't set it. And so what we're doing is we're creating a lot of junk. And so there was an AIM study done about how much information that they had, how much corporations' information that they had. And they can't either find it or use it, or it's on a file share, and they can't, it's just a mess. So it doesn't matter that we created these systems that were overly complex because people weren't using them. They're still creating digital trash. So we thought we were smart. We actually prompt the user at upload. We think that we can automate the workflow. These are the typical things when I say, okay, well, how did you do it? So you make sure that people actually set the right metadata, that they actually put it in the right location. They kick off business process. We're smarter than that. So we actually just force upon them still a very difficult way of being able to create the content, put it in a logical fashion, and make it usable for other people. And also better, we've had this kind of for a while, right? For Kofax, Captivas, Ephesoft's, this Mailroom automation capability. So we can actually create a business process where we have this importing capability, and we can automate that capture process, and then we can deal with exceptions, and then we can actually push them inside of our content management system, and we can have them be able to do, we still have to do some background intelligence of being able to create that taxonomy, but we have enough information to be able to automate it and make it look like magic. However, and we're going to talk about this a little bit with Ephesoft because I want to show you that this still has a good spot and a good location for the right use cases. And what we're really focused on now during this one are some new ways to be able to do that. It doesn't fit every use case. So some of these use cases that are very good for this is when you actually have a slew of information that's coming in from various sources, from email, from faxes, from scans, from electronic documents, and then you can bring them in, you can treat them as a batch, and then you can release them into your content management system. So the first thing that I want to talk about is that process. And so we end up getting our various sources. So we can even have different CMIS sources, which is Content Management Interoperability Services, which again we use to release it to Ephesoft. But this is the traditional architecture that we're creating around trying to make this an intelligent system, trying to make it so they don't have to do so much. So we end up with not a bunch of digital garbage. So the Ephesoft system, what we do is we take those different sources, and then we identify the document types. And then we give it a sample. Now, a differentiator in case those people that are in Capture, maybe not in Capture, some of the other competing software, it's when you do this classification, and this is classification that's not based on how it looks. This is classification that's based on the content. So you're creating a dictionary and say, that thing's an invoice, or that thing's a 1040, or that thing's an appraisal. So it gives you the capability of being able to not only assemble these documents, so you can just throw a bunch in there without separator sheets or barcodes or anything, but then we're able to train it at a very low cost in the sense of being able to do it with one or two samples. If you used any of the competition software, this is many times 50, 100 samples. If it has a wide range of difference, this could be hundreds of samples. And for those that have created the solutions and been consultants for a while, it's usually a more difficult time to actually have them agree about what kind of document type it is, much less have them dig out 100 samples of that document type. It's a very hard problem. So one of the big benefits of Ephesoft is that, and this is a huge benefit in itself. If I can just say what kind of document it is, I can do a lot of information. I can automate off of this. But then it also, because of that classification that's going on, so I get it from my various sources and I'm able to classify those different documents. But then I'm able to figure out what kind of information, what kind of properties, what kind of metadata, what kind of index values. You're all going to have different names for this depending on if you're imaging or records management or what have you. But you're trying to find the information that you want for that particular document type. So let's take a look at what this looks like. I'm setting it up, and then of course we release it into our repository. But this is a technical session, so we're going to start looking at how you set this up, what it looks like within code. Hope that's okay with everybody, but we're going to look at it. So in this use case, what we're doing is we're looking at invoices. We want to automate an accounts payable process. And so we might want some information. We might want a lot of information off of this. But for the sake of ease for this demonstration, what we care about really is the invoice number, the date, and the total amount that it costs. So now we're going to go to our Ephesoft system, and we're going to set that up. So what you're seeing right now is the Ephesoft administration. And what we see right here and listed, and hopefully you can see it at least a little bit. Hold on one second. A little better? Are the batch classes that we have defined in here. So if you think about the hierarchy, we have batch classes inside of a batch class, and we're just going to open up our invoice one. We have different document types. And so in this case, you can have a slew of document types for a batch class. And I'm not going to go into the reasons why you would have different batch classes. You don't necessarily need more than one. If you have questions about that at that level, please ask at the end of the session or what have you. But in this case, we have document types. So document types are inside of a batch class. And we fed it a couple samples. And so we taught it how to classify these kind of documents. Again, the way that it does the classification when we feed those samples, and this will relate for those that have Alfresco already, and if you don't have Alfresco already, this will relate later. What it does is it creates an index of the information that's inside of there. It uses a Lucene in the back end. And so many of us are familiar with that. And so it has an importance of words. And so how many times is that repeated? How many times is it inside of the document that I'm processing? So it uses that dictionary to do the classification. And now that I've classified it, I have information. That invoice number, the invoice dates, the invoice amount. And again, there's a lot more you can do with this processing, but I'm going to make it a very, very vanilla flavoring here. So inside of here, we might have simple rules of how to get that information. I want to emphasize that one of the true benefits of Ephesoft is its capabilities of being able to do free-form extraction. What free-form extraction means is that I have the capability of looking at the entire document, looking for patterns, look for key value patterns. So I can say, look for invoice number, look to around it for a 7-digit number, or what have you. I can make rules like that. And you can have more than one rule per document type. So invoice number, we might do exactly that. We might look for invoice no, because if you remember correctly, which you probably don't, that's what we're trying to find right here, is the invoice number. We're looking to the right of it, and we're looking for a particular pattern. So that's what you would call a simple free-form extraction rule. You also have a tool in here that lets you not really care about that, and you have these advanced extraction rules. So if I go here, I might bring in a sample, that same sample that we were looking at. And it turns out that I wasn't that confident because it said total too many times. So I might want to look at tax, and I want to look to the bottom right of it, but I didn't want to specify that. And so I want a rule along these lines for being able to get it, get the information. And so now I have this tool, this administration tool, that lets me bring in these samples and be able to test those samples. But I want to emphasize this is free-form extraction. This is merely a utility, if you look at the bottom left here, to create some sort of offset, some sort of relationship between the key and the value that we're looking for. And we can make, again, many of these. So if I were to make a simple key up here, and again, I'm just creating a relationship, and make something that's, and I'm just kind of free-forming this. Oh. Let's see how good I am at this. And I look to the bottom right of it for an amount, a dollar amount. Is that going to work? So again, this is a very important concept, and the reason I'm not trying to give you training here, but the technical part of this that's important is that you can look around an object. You can make a relationship. So it doesn't matter if I have one flavor of this or 1,500 flavors of this. I can give it several rules, and it should be able to hit that information all the time. And there's much more ways that you can make this more granular and make it more generic area that you're looking for. It really depends on the specificity of the information that you're trying to obtain. So now we're looking at traditional mailroom automation. And the reason I'm going heavy into this is because I don't think that everybody here has a capture system. Like, who here has capture knowledge? Okay, so about half. So traditional is that, and this is not so much, this is still intelligent document capture. So you automate as much as possible. So if we're able to get all the information that we wanted, just go right into your Alfresco repository, it just exports out. And so they have a bunch of connectors for how to get that information out. We're getting it in via CMIS, which is another technical piece that we can go into, but essentially it's just a content model mapping exercise of saying, here's what it is inside of Ephesoft, here's what it is inside of Alfresco, with my namespaces and object types. But I have all these documents that I need to process as that were exceptions, and I caused this exception to happen. And I'm going to show you what that looks like, because I want to show you this traditional mailroom. And so you can see that I captured this information. I have some really cool ways of being able to get the information out. If this wasn't retrieved at all, I can go and just click on a value and be able to get that information. So even if you create it in such a way that you're not extracting all the values, you still have a good way of being able to get the information and making sure that people index your information correctly. In this case, I said that these things had to be 8 digits long, and so I forced this at an application level to error out. I can look at this other one, has a smaller dollar amount, and I can do that same thing. And I can push it on. The reason that I wanted to start there is show you that this is still a very valid use case. If I had a bunch of different sources and I'm trying to bring it in, I can go ahead and process that. And so now I can go ahead and look in my Alfresco repository, and this might take us a couple minutes. Hopefully that's... So within a few minutes, what we're going to see in here is that this is not only getting dropped in as a document, but it's getting dropped in as a document that has an appropriate naming convention. You can change that naming convention, and also has the metadata and the typing that I care about. And so now I put some back-end logic in there, say, go ahead and put it here. But of course, you can do whatever you want. If you want to spin up business process, if you wanted to make sure that you created the file structure that was necessary, you can do that. Or alert somebody, notify that it's ready for processing. It all depends on what you're trying to do for that processing piece. So now you can see that they're inside of there. So if I look in there, I have that same document. Now I don't have this general document that's inside of my repository, but I have something that's automatically classified and indexed inside of my repository. So that's all neat and good. See, I paid for somebody to do that. That's all neat and good. But let's take it to the next level. Let's say our source is Alfresco. Let's say that I have some use cases where I need to have a system of record, that I don't want to have it in flight and then process in another system. Or maybe I just want a single user interface for people to be able to interact with their documents. So now we can drop it and forget it, automatically kick off workflow. So anything that we can write within that scripting behavior inside of Alfresco, creating rules, creating everything else, now we can do automatically inside of our repository as opposed to having that very streamlined use case. But now that I can have this other place for being able to have in-place records management and disposition schedules, and you can think of this can take care of any use case that you're trying, or business requirement that you're dealing with today. So how do we do this? Now we're going to start getting a little bit more technical. And again, I'm not going to get like super deep inside of here because I'm not going to show you every single line of code. We're going to get to some of it. But I want you to get the general concept during this session. So what we're going to do is we're going to break that down. So there's a bunch of things that are going on inside of the Ephesoft system on the back end. So we're processing the pages, we're OCRing, we're classifying the pages, we're assembling them correctly. We're dealing with exceptions on classification. We're now going to extract the information based on the classification. If there's something that we couldn't extract or doesn't go against our validation rules, then we're actually dealing with that exception, and operators deal with that. And then we're finally releasing it inside of a repository. So now our calls are more atomic. They're still the same general logic, but go OCR this document. Go classify this document based on the OCR. And there's different ways you can classify that document too. Extract information based on that classification on the document. So this is the sequence. We're going to say, Alfresco, go OCR this information. Get the results back. You're going to see this within my slides sometime, the HOCR. It's just HTML way of being able to have OCR. It's just coordinates and words. So think about it as that. Now I send those HOCR back and I say, okay, now classify this document. Now I want you to extract that document based on the classification that I received. So there's some XML going back and forth and some binaries going back and forth to be able to create that same logic that we were seeing within this mailroom automation workflow. We're also keeping some, and this is of course stuff that we've written inside of Alfresco. I should point that out specifically. This integration does not exist natively inside of Ephesoft, inside of Alfresco. These are RESTful web calls that we're utilizing inside of Alfresco to be able to create this functionality. So we have to have some statefulness because I have to make sure that I have the HOCR file, that it has been OCR'd prior to being able to classify it. I have to know that it's classified to be able to know that I can now do an extraction of that document. So we ended up generating an action. The reason that we generated an action is so we can actually reuse it throughout the framework. So it doesn't matter if we want to use it within a rule. It doesn't matter if we want to use it within workflow. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Behaviors. You can now reuse the action service to be able to wrap, create this functionality throughout my repository, depending on your business requirements. And I can also wrap them inside of transactions. So what does that look like? What did we create? So we ended up creating an abstract web service action. And then we started creating, and this looks overly complex for the relationship that's here, but we'll describe here in why. And so we have some certain ones around classification and extraction. The reason that these are kind of singles off of here is because there's different ways that you can classify a document. You still can classify it off a barcode. You still can classify it off of the image, the way it looks. Kind of the test for that, if I can tell you what kind of document it is from 20 feet and I'm staring at it, then image classification might work. And so that we created this framework for being able to extend more of those services and make them available within Alfresco. So same thing goes with extraction. So I can extract based on a database. So I can send all the contents of a particular document over. Very powerful for AP type of applications. And then be able to get information back because it was related to some PO or some vendor information. So I don't have to create any of those extraction rules. Different ways we did it. So this is why we created this. So what does this look like? So I'm just going to show you a piece of that. And we noticed we had like 3 calls. And again, you can have more calls. And we need to still expand out this framework that we're creating for Ephesoft inside of Alfresco. But one of the things that we're going to show you here is showing you a test. And so a JUnit test that we created for being able to extract using KV. So we already know the classification of this document. We already have the OCR. Or the OCRs, right? Because if it's multi-pages, then that's why it's wrapped in a zip file, because every single HOCR file is going to be representative of the content of a particular page. And we're going to give it some information. That information is going to be around, what batch class do I want to do? In this case, we already know we did the classification. What OCR, what document type are we associating with this and want to extract some information? So what that looks like when you test this out is that we get some XML back. It's using that same rule, that same batch class. So this is reusable within my Ephesoft world as well. I can have information that's getting dropped inside of my, my Alfresco instance, but use that same batch class to be able to process documents that are falling right inside of my Alfresco repository. So now it tells me that I have my invoice number, I have my invoice date, I have my total amount. And so I can process this XML, giving me information back. So what does that look like inside of Alfresco? So I can still drop some information in here, and here we wrapped a couple of exposed actions on the document type itself. But I wanted to show you that this wasn't just some sort of hard-coded black magic, although it probably still could be if I were smart enough. And of course, now everything's freaking out. Okay, there we go. So you can see here, if you're familiar with Alfresco, some of us are, that this is just a general document. I have some information about this. Happens to be a TIFF file. I have some information around where it came from, the focal point, the focal length, but it doesn't. There's nothing in there that tells me what it is. And so this is the problem that we've been having to deal with. We have to be smart about creating workflow or prompting somebody on dropping it in. But instead, since we wrapped it in actions and now we're just exposing some of those actions, I can say classify. Guess what? It's an invoice. So now we have a little bit more information about it. Extract it. Now we have it fully populated. Now this is not how we would implement it, because we don't want to make somebody have to deal with dropping it somewhere and pressing 2 buttons for no reason whatsoever. But I want to show you that this is it's key, right? I mean, this is a problem that we're having to deal with every day. Maybe somebody's either not doing it, and maybe we're so good that our users are populating all our metadata, and yet they're still making mistakes, right? So let's try to mitigate any of those problems by automating the process. So how we would truly implement that is I might create some rules. So if I look here and I go inside of my Alfresco repository and I look at the rules that are inside of here, you can see that we exposed those different actions. And now I'm classifying it based on OCR, and so that one actually has those 2 calls wrapped in it, because we don't really care about just getting the OCR back. We want to get the OCR, and then we want to classify based on this OCR in this use case. So we wrap that in one action, and then we actually want to extract keyword values based on the OCR. And so now, anytime anything gets dropped inside of this folder, we're going to call those automatically. And of course, you can make these asynchronous if you wanted to, but for this sake, you can see that it's taking a little bit longer. It's making those web calls out still pretty fast. These are actually going from Alfresco to Ephesoft back. So relatively quick. And if you think about it, it's running on a VM with 2 cores on my machine, then you can make this a very fast transaction. So now that's how we're going to implement it. Now I don't want to over-advertise this. We're still going to have to deal with the exceptions. Now that we've taken that, one of the huge benefits of being able to use Ephesoft as the intake is they wrapped a bunch of functionality about having to deal with the exceptions. So now if I can't classify it, if I can't OCR it, now I have to maybe be smart and spin up those workflows or notify somebody to go index it or do the right thing, whatever that may be. But still, if you have decent content and I can OCR that content and I'm creating rules about how I'm utilizing that information, I can get a large number of my documents automated. And that's what's really key here. This is not, there's no golden egg, but this is pretty dang close to it. It's at least a silver one. So maybe another use case that we have here is that we want to put this inside of a workflow. And so I'm going to use those actions, and I want to classify and extract based on that. So I'm going to create an action service based on that. And then I want to use it for some intelligent information around here. So maybe I want to pass it to somebody if it's over a certain amount. In this case, what we're doing is we're going to actually pass it to a processor if a document is, if an invoice is over $100. So I can go to another location inside of here that's not wired up for automation. Drop them inside of here. And you can see that was a lot quicker. We're not actually calling those web services at this point. Oops. And so you can see that we have these named appropriately. I didn't point that out a while ago, but one over 100 and one under 100. So let's go ahead and spin it up on both. So we can see that I showed you what that workflow is, so I'm not going to go inside of the task manager and show you exactly where it's inside of the process. But now, we're passing something over to Poly processor. So if I log out, now I can give Poly some information. I know that this one's over 119 bucks or 100 bucks. That was our rule. And so she received a notification that she has to review this. I should have put a little bit more text in there saying, please, Polly, review this inside of my automation. But you can see that this one, that the only invoice that she had inside of her task was this one that was over 101. The other one went straight to payment. Now, is this a practical exercise? Maybe if it was changed a little bit for a higher amount, or saying that somebody that anything over $50,000 has to go to a review for being able to do approval on a particular purchase request. Maybe that's a more practical implementation of this, but this is just a very simple metaphor for how you can actually implement automation using this information. There's some other implementations that we're talking about within like the mortgage world, where it might be that initially they just want like a few fields off of particular documents, but then later on down the process they might want a few thousand fields off of particular documents to be able to do like a final review for being able to do underwriting. This is something that can be done throughout this workflow. And so we can ask for a few of these pieces of information and then process as much as we can at that point. Later on down the workflow, if it flows down and saying that it's going to a final approval as opposed to all those iterations of the paperwork that goes on for a closing, then we can say, okay, give me all this information, because now I have to really make sure that everything is good. So that's another practical implementation of workflow with this. So that's pretty much what I wanted to show you today in the sense of the functionality. Again, I don't want to try to get down to how exactly we implement it. I'm not trying to hide it from you either. So I want to leave that open for your inquiry. But essentially what we're doing is that really high level. I wish that I can say that this was just really hard and a very difficult task. But it turns out that the code behind it is really simple. These calls are essentially written on their wiki. So if you go to Ephesoft Developer's Guide, they have the sample code for being able to say, okay, OCR this thing, classify this thing, extract this thing. But what I do want to talk about is the other things that you can do. I kind of alluded to that. But we can create searchable PDFs. So if we're getting information in that are like PDFs that actually are just images with no text layers, a lot of us have that problem. We can just make that call out. Here's a PDF, index it, get that information back. And now I have version number 1.1 of my document, and guess what? Now it has full text search. Another powerful way that you can do this. You can also classify, and I did talk about this, based on a barcode and extract from barcode as well. So if you do have those kind of document types, you can. And that's why we're creating this framework, to be able to utilize all these different utilities that are out there and available within the Ephesoft web library. The regular expression extraction, so I can just say, hey, go look for a pattern. So if you're dealing with anything with policy, claims, patient IDs, if you're having to deal with something that's free-form information, and that you're trying to find information that is exposed inside of these documents, but you have no way of knowing like where or when or even one of those rules, I say, hey, look for something that has a capital letter and 8 digits. Look for the entire document. So you can start making some really, doing a lot with a very little amount of code, because it's literally just passing that pattern over and then calling it on a particular document. The fuzzy database lookup, I talked about that, very powerful for like AP applications, for being able to just say, hey, here's the content, and I have a back-end system that might correlate it to a vendor, an internal ID, information that's not even on the document. I can just map it according to some database. And essentially, it's just a map of the content and matching it up against a row inside of a database. You can think about it that way. You can do the more traditional ways of being able to say, okay, I've extracted this thing, and now look at it based on that key as well. But very powerful mechanism. They also have administration functionality. We didn't go inside of a lot of the Ephesoft pieces, but like which batch classes are in flight, who has it right now. That kind of information is exposed within inside of there. And again, go to the developer guide on Ephesoft if you want to know more about that. So the things to consider. So these, if you do plan on doing these kind of implementations, these are the kind of things that we're working with right now. Review and validation. What do you do if you cannot automate it? Because chances are you don't want to just proliferate that and end up maybe with a 2 or 5 or 10% of them that you can't, depending on the quality of images that you're processing. But you don't want to just have those inside of your system. So whether you spin up a workflow, you notify somebody, you actually have an auditable report that comes out every so often that people go do cleanup, whatever it is that you think is best for your organization, implement it. Because now you're not taking advantage of that Ephesoft user interface, user experience, that takes care of it for you. Asynchronous requests, back-ending this, like making sure that it's very hardened in the sense of what happens if Ephesoft is down for a day. Making sure you backlog those, and lifecycle management really helps with that as well, having the statefulness of saying that this has been OCR, this has been classified, this has been extracted. Making sure that you have enough information inside of the lifecycle inside of there, whether it be aspects or like we're doing, or properties, or however you want to deal with it, make sure that you're dealing with it like that. And again, the lifecycle management for being able to just understand where in the cycle, if you're doing more than one of these calls, which you probably will be, where's it at? These are the things we haven't done yet that we really need to do for our library. We want to create the HOCR as a rendition. It's a rendition. It's the content that's inside of that document. Right now we just kind of have some pointers. That is kind of a little kludgy the way that we've implemented it today. But if any of you are looking to do this, the next thing that we're going to do, and I recommend that you do, is just that's another flavor of the document that you have inside of there. You can have that forever, and if you have any of those rules where you have some data and then you want some more later. And this is really key when I say that, because I think that you've heard a couple times, and I really liked Andrew's talk about big data and his explanation of how you do it, you're going to have this document's going to live longer than what you think that document is today. And so the information that's on there, you might want to index more later. It turns out that that you may want to have more properties later. And if you've ever implemented something and they changed the content model and they had like 1 million documents, oh my God, you know, like, what a problem. Well, okay, we have to go through migration. We have to send this to a bunch of people. We have to have them manually index it. Wouldn't it be neat if I can just change it and then actually have, you know, my Ephesoft rules and my Ephesoft mapping to these documents, and then be able to say, oh, I want these 3 other properties. Now go out and look for anything that's an invoice, and, you know, now I care about that thing because some new regulation came out and I need to know what those things are. I need to use that for automation or auditing or what have you. There's some really cool thoughts around, you know, or at least that I've had in the last 2 days around big data, and also Ike Kavas sitting there right there kind of looking down because he's getting bored with my talk because he's the CTO of Ephesoft. And so he has some really neat thoughts around big data and how Ephesoft can be utilized within that space. So if it intrigues you for a conversation or for an implementation, even better. But I recommend that you go talk to him. And the rest of the Ephesoft folks, we have the CEO here and the VP of sales, and well, we have a slew. Basically everybody that's in the front, everybody else is scared and in the back. But come talk to them, especially if you're a partner or thinking about becoming a partner. If you're contemplating becoming a customer, make sure you talk to us. Image magic transformations. So right now there's a certain amount of documents that are supported under these web calls. And so right now TIFF is supported, and then we have to kind of do some manipulations of like PDFs to TIFFs or PNGs. In January it should be PDFs as well. But what we want to do is just back end all of those, create other renditions of those things, and start supporting other flavors of the documents. So being able to have Word documents and everything else under the sun, be able to go through these calls outs and being able to do classification based on the content, and also extraction based on this content. So we want to blow that out and be able to do all the correct transformations. That way we can automate the back end process for being able to make those calls out to Ephesoft. And of course, and I've alluded to this, implement all the services that are available out there. So our framework is kind of extensive in the sense of what's available. And so anybody can deploy it and dictate how they want to, how they want to leverage those. That's pretty much all what I had to say today, but I do want to say that we're going to be passing around some sort of helmet or bowl or something to that effect. There we go. A construction hat. And we're going to, if you want to drop your card in, we're going to be doing a raffle for, or if you want to fill out a form, we're going to do a raffle for a gift card. So I do recommend that you throw it in there, because why not? You can win some stuff. And also we're going to be hosting a drinking social, what is the pub crawl this evening at the Rattlesnake Bar. There's information available everywhere, and if you want to talk to us, I think that some of the Ephesoft folks will be there for a while, and so if you want to strike up a conversation about what you heard today, I definitely would think that you're going to get some truthiness from after a couple of drinks. And if you do have any other questions, or you want to actually start talking about this framework that we're creating or the code behind the scenes, there is, of course, just email me. You can follow Zia Consulting on Twitter, and also Ephesoft. So if you want to follow the developments of what's going on here, and I recommend that you go check out our use cases and our webinars that are recorded on our website, ziaconsulting.com. Any questions?
First, I was wondering if there are any limitations on what versions of either Alfresco or Ephesoft you can use with these APIs.
So not within, as of 3.0, they had the web services available. It's a different cost structure for on top of Ephesoft for on top of there, so it's not automatically part of the license. Part of 3.1 will be exposing some of the more availability for being able to process PDFs as opposed to just the TIFFs and PNGs. Within the Alfresco world, no. I mean, it's that since we did that implementation, it's a web call, and you get some XML back, and you process it. So it doesn't matter where you embed this in. Even if you had your own user interface and you want to call it from there, it's just web call. So there's no limitation.
And then I was also wondering if you are running an Ephesoft instance, and that's what it's hitting, or if
it is. I mean, what I was hitting here. So I have two different ports that are up right now, or actually a whole bunch, because I'm using our quick start capability of JRebel and Spring. But if you looked at what we're doing inside of here, or what we're hitting, we're dynamically hitting this same batch class. So what I was not showing was not magic at all. It actually was making web calls out to itself, of course, in localhost, because I don't trust any internet capabilities over here. But yes, we're hitting that dynamically.
So I understand you can classify documents and extract index fields from them when they're dropped into Alfresco. And that's true for PDF and images like JPEG, TIFF, etc. What about Office documents? Are you able to extract from Office documents or other electronic documents?
So there's kind of two answers to that. The more traditional use case, the mailroom automation, they have an expansion if you're processing emails to do transformations of pretty much any attachments or anything that OpenOffice can transfer. So there is a transformation to a TIFF. Within the web calls that we're doing right here, and that's part of what the to-dos that we have to do, what we're going to end up doing is creating renditions that are supported. And so it's not the most optimal utility, but essentially, because we're creating an image that we can OCR, even though that it was already text. But it's very clean in the sense of that availability. And I'm not sure if that's on the roadmap for support of Word documents, native Word, and it's on the roadmap.
Great. And I also wonder about the validation process, and also what is the percentage of accuracy? So as you classify and index all these documents, obviously some percentage of them is going to have errors, you're going to have maybe, so what is the percentage of accuracy, and then what is the recommended correction process or validation process? Is that just through workflow?
So there's one answer for that for the traditional, which is, if you use the traditional Ephesoft interface, then that's just going to automatically, through validation rules, give it to the right people through Active Directory groups or what have you that should be processing these different documents. From our integration, it really depends on how you want to deal with it. So some of the ways that I thought of that could be dealt with, and it really depends on the business and their process they want to create, is sending those to workflow, putting them in a particular location in which people are notified. It could be anything under the sun. So any process that you think that you can automate through the back end of saying, because as soon as I get that information back and the classification, what I didn't show you is that there's classification confidence, and there's thresholds that you can even set within Ephesoft that will be sent back to you as well. And I can compare those and say, I'm not really sure if this document is that type of document. And then I can do whatever the right thing is since I'm processing that XML anyway.
Okay, thank you.
I would just follow up. Can you do reporting off of the confidence levels so that you can then go back and look at workflow and decide if confidence levels thresholds have to go up or down based off of?
Again, two answers. So there's this thing called the Ephesoft advanced reporting. So if you're using the traditional workflow automation, then you have enough information to do root cause analysis to figure out what's not being classified, what's not being extracted, who did it, what was it, what did it think it was, what did the user set it as. But you just gave me a really good idea for expanding out this thing for inside of the Alfresco world. And so being able to expand functionality like that, being able to have some auditing, and some of that information that we're kind of retaining off aspects, I think that we can blow that out a little bit to figure out, like what did the system think it was, much like the advanced reporting. What did the system think it was, and what did a user set it as? I have enough information where all of a sudden I can start creating those auditable reports. But right now, it's not available. So thanks for the idea.
Well, I have three questions.
Okay.
First one is your server runs in Windows servers and also in Linux, but it has different features or not?
So the enterprise version of Ephesoft, that's what you're referring to, is Ephesoft, I assume, runs on Windows today. January, it's going to run on either Linux or Windows.
Version 3?
Version 3.1. So that's coming out in January. Part of the support is going to be Linux support.
It's based on Tesseract, the OCR part?
No. So they're going to, yeah, so I had to make sure. So this version uses RecoStar on the back end. Now they've signed a contract with Nuance for the Linux flavor.
Okay. Second question is about your cloud service.
Yeah.
What's the difference between what you get on premise and your cloud service, and if your cloud service can be integrated with Alfresco?
Paid cloud service or the the cloud version, the free cloud version, or?
No, the paid or
Okay.
the enterprise
So the enterprise
or
cloud version, there's not really a huge difference between it, except for you can't really get to the underbelly of some of the specific settings, like how it's processing things and optimizing threads and heap and things of that nature. Those are all managed, but you can manage things at a batch class level. And so the document types, where it goes, everything else, you can do it. Of course, there's some limitations of how you get things in and out because it's a cloud service. As opposed to how it can monitor particular UNC folders. It's not going to try to create a VNC path to your UNC folder that it's monitoring to pull in data.
And can you send documents to a remote Alfresco installation or something like that?
Yeah, so the CMIS is supported in the cloud version. So if you wanted to go from like cloud to cloud, then there's nothing restricting that.
Okay. And the last one, if I have time.
No,
please.
I think we're good.
Could you share some figures about your largest projects in terms of documents, integrating Ephesoft with Alfresco?
Ephesoft with Alfresco? Well, those are kind of like two different things. How does you can scale either system as needed. And so we have systems that we're putting out there that are 100 million pages a year. Other people that are processing tens or hundreds of thousands of documents. So much less pages per year. When it comes to the Alfresco side of things, it's just a question of architecture. So some of our larger Ephesoft Alfresco ones, what we end up doing is creating a node in itself for import. And that way we created like a cluster of like 3, could be like a couple for users and workflow and everything else, and another one that is out there for like import capability. So in this case, it's going directly to that server, not necessarily the proxy server. And it'll go to the other ones if failed. So it's just a question of the architecture that you put in, but there's not a limitation with the amount of documents.
Just to know about numbers, millions or?
Millions. I think that the biggest one we have right now is like in the tens of millions.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, and somebody asked a question before, and I just realized that I missed it. They said, what is the confidence? Sorry about that, I just realized I didn't answer that question. It really depends on the quality of your content. So the rule of thumb is you can get really good classification and extraction if you have like 300 DPI documents. And this is more of a imaging thing, not necessarily a Ephesoft thing. You're going to find this everywhere. So when it comes to the OCR accuracy, if you have 300 DPI documents, you're going to have really good classification and extraction. 200 DPI, you can have really good classification. Extractions sometimes get funky with characters and such. Below that, it gets fuzzy, and especially if you're dealing with like 92 DPI documents, it's just not that good. Then you might start looking to the other pieces of Ephesoft, if you can do image classification or barcode recognition, that kind of solution. Oh, in percentage-wise, inside of like the 90s and such, is what we're seeing. Because there's always fluctuations of images being folded over and such, that things that we just couldn't pick up. Anybody else? Well, thank you for coming to my presentation. If you have any questions, please come up and ask.